Welcome back to This Day in Irish History. I'm your host, Raymond Welsh. Before we dive into today's story, if you'd like to explore other significant events that happened on this day in Irish history, visit thisdayirishhistory.com. The link is in the episode description. Now let's journey back to March 26th, 1787, when the British Parliament in Ireland passed the Tumultuous Risings Act, an ominously titled piece of legislation aimed at suppressing rural unrest. It was a direct response to growing agitation across the Irish countryside, particularly from secretive agrarian societies like the Whiteboys. What followed was an era of intensified state control, crackdowns, and a deepening of the divide between the ruling elite and the rural poor. To understand the significance of this act, we must first take a closer look at the social and economic landscape of late 18th century Ireland. This was a period marked by widespread inequality, especially in the rural south and west. Tenant farmers and labourers, many of them Catholic, lived under the burden of high rents, insecure leases, and the infamous tithe system, where they were forced to pay a portion of their income to support the Anglican Church of Ireland, even if they were of another faith. It was an arrangement that bred bitterness and despair. Out of this fertile ground for discontent grew the Whiteboys. First emerging in the 1760s, the Whiteboys were a secret society of rural protesters who took their name from the white smocks they wore during nighttime raids. Their tactics were dramatic and often violent, tearing down fences, attacking landlords, and threatening tithe collectors. But beneath the chaos was a clear message. These men were demanding justice, land rights, and relief from crushing economic conditions. By the mid-1780s, Whiteboy activity had surged again, prompting alarm among landowners and the ruling authorities. The British-controlled Irish Parliament saw these risings not as symptoms of systemic injustice, but as criminal disturbances threatening the social order. Their response came in the form of the Tumultuous Risings Act, passed on this day in 1787. The act was sweeping and severe. It criminalized any unlawful assembly of people, especially at night, with the intent to intimidate or cause disorder. More pointedly, it targeted those who interfered with tithe collection, destroyed property, or engaged in conspiratorial meetings. The penalties were deliberately harsh: imprisonment, transportation to the colonies, or in some cases, execution. The government hoped to break the back of the Whiteboy movement through fear and force. But legislation like the Tumultuous Risings Act did more than punish protest. It revealed a growing disconnect between the ruling class and the people they governed. The authorities failed to recognize the structural injustices that fueled these uprisings. Instead of addressing tenant insecurity, exploitative rents, or the oppressive tithe system, they doubled down on repression. The act became one more layer in a long tradition of coercive laws in Ireland, part of the same continuum as the penal laws and the later insurrection acts. In practice, the Tumultuous Risings Act led to mass arrests, military deployments in rural areas, and the use of informers to root out secret societies. It created a climate of fear, but it did not quell the underlying discontent. New groups emerged in the decades that followed: the Defenders, the Ribbonmen, and eventually the United Irishmen, each shaped in part by the legacy of earlier protests and the state's repressive response. The act also underscored the complicated relationship between law and legitimacy in Ireland. While it was legal, many saw it as unjust. For those in power, it was a tool to preserve order. For the rural poor, it was yet another sign that the system was stacked against them. In hindsight, the Tumultuous Risings Act was not merely a reactionary measure. It was a reflection of a society in conflict with itself. It highlighted the desperate attempts of an embattled regime to assert control, even as calls for reform and justice grew louder and more organized. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Ireland's rich and often turbulent past. Please like and subscribe, and until next time, I'm Raymond Welsh. Slán go fáil.